Welcome back, everyone, to today's explainer on the year 1966. Now, for those of us studying modern social history, you already know this is a massive, pivotal inflection point. I mean, this is the exact moment where the mainstream pop monoculture literally fractured forever. We're talking about a rapid, radical shift from simple stage performances to deep, street-level activism and absolutely unprecedented artistic growth.
Okay, let's just quickly run through today's syllabus. We're going to cover 1. The Great Generational Clash, 2. Pop charts versus protest anthems, 3. The studio as an instrument, 4. Acid tests and counterculture visuals, and finally 5. The FM radio revolution. Let's get right into it.
We're kicking things off with a pretty incredible, almost symbolic backstage confrontation. You've got Frank Sinatra, who is the absolute embodiment of the old-school establishment, famously delivering these incredibly harsh words, literally calling rock musicians cretinous goons. Now, Sinatra survived the big band era and the crooners by dedicating his entire life to professional craft. So to him, 4 kids from Liverpool holding guitars, that was just a noisy fad destroying real music. But here's the twist. When he actually confronted the Beatles backstage, what could have been a permanent dividing line actually turned into a moment of mutual respect. Sinatra essentially challenged them to prove they were more than just lucky kids, to push their harmonies and become true artists.
So I want you to keep this question in the back of your minds. Maybe circle it for the final exam. How exactly did this generational tension birth a completely new era of music? Seriously, think about how this dialectical clash practically forced artists to evolve way beyond simple pop hits. The Beatles didn't just shrink away from the old guard's criticism, right? They used it as fuel. It drove them to create art that actually mattered.
Which brings us to Section 1, the Great Generational Clash.
When we map out the #1 hits month by month, you can actually see this tug-of-war playing out in real time. We've got innovators like the Beatles and the Stones introducing completely new sounds, like, say, the sitar on Paint It Black. But right alongside them, the traditionalists were holding some serious ground. I mean, this all culminated in July when Sinatra, the chairman of the board himself, literally knocked the Beatles' paperback writer out of the #1 spot with Strangers in the Night. It's just a perfect snapshot of the ultimate generational battle happening right there on the airwaves.
Moving on to Section 2, Pop Charts versus Protest Anthems.
Now, we often retroactively think of the 60s as just this monolithic time of anti-war protests, but the mainstream reality was actually very different. The undisputed #1 song of the entire year wasn't a protest song. It was Staff Sergeant Barry Sadler's incredibly pro-military Ballad of the Green Berets, which sat at the very top for 5 whole weeks. Meanwhile, bubbling up from the underground, you had this massive swell of social activist music. We're talking about Pete Seeger's anti-Vietnam tracks and Janis Ian's incredibly daring Society's Child, written from a 15-year-old's perspective about teenage interracial romance.
The cultural pressures of this fractured society were just immense. It got to the point where it drove massive icons like Bob Dylan into total reclusion. After his motorcycle crash in July, Dylan really seized that opportunity to withdraw from the public eye. As he put it later, he just wanted to get out of the rat race. And he meant it. He didn't tour again for almost 8 years. That fundamentally altered the folk rock landscape and really signaled a broader retreat from this increasingly chaotic public sphere.
Let's head into Section 3, the studio as an instrument.
And that public sphere was definitely becoming hostile. Remember John Lennon's offhand comment about the Beatles being more popular than Jesus? Well, that sparked massive cultural controversies, particularly down in the American South. We saw widespread radio bans. We literally saw bonfires where people were burning their records. The touring environment was becoming genuinely dangerous, the crowd screaming was absolutely deafening, and wildly enough, there were even 11,000 unsold seats at their second Shea Stadium concert. So essentially driven off the road by all these mounting factors, the Beatles played their final live show at Candlestick Park in August and made a monumental decision. They were going to become purely studio artists.
And once they didn't have to worry about replicating their songs live on stage, they could really experiment. Take the track Paperback Writer, for example. Paul McCartney and the engineering team were super frustrated that American R&B records had this much deeper bass sound. So what did they do? They literally rewired the studio. To capture that tone, they took a second loudspeaker and used it as a microphone to catch the electric current from the bass speaker. It's brilliant. They were completely pushing the boundaries of what a pop record could even sound like.
And right across the ocean, the Beach Boys were doing the exact same thing. Brian Wilson utilized a staggering 90 hours of tape across 4 different studios. He spent $50,000, which was astronomical at the time, just to construct this ultimate 3-minute and 39-second studio symphony, Good Vibrations. The recording studio was no longer just a room to capture a live band, it was the canvas itself.
Okay, jumping into Section 4, acid tests and counterculture visuals.
For any of us studying this era, you absolutely have to track the rapid escalation of the youth movement right alongside the music. It's crucial to follow the trajectory of LSD within the counterculture. Back in January, you had the massive Trips Festival in San Francisco, drawing 10,000 people. Organized by Ken Kesey, featuring the Grateful Dead, it was this wild multimedia explosion of strobe lights, electronics, and mind-expanding experimentation. But of course, the establishment pushed back hard and fast. By April, Sandoz Pharmaceuticals recalled their LSD supply, and by October, a strict new federal law made it officially illegal.
But here's the thing, this movement didn't just change the music, it completely revolutionized visual art. As historians, if we treat these concert posters as primary documents, we see how artists like Wes Wilson were synthesizing graphic design, swirling typography, and these wildly vibrant colors to promote venues like the Fillmore and the Avalon Ballroom. They were creating an entirely new visual aesthetic that perfectly matched the fluid, unpredictable nature of the emerging counterculture. Take the iconic Grateful Dead poster created by Mouse and Kelly in June of '66. This is actually the very first use of the skeleton motif for the band. But what is so fascinating from a historical perspective is that they repurposed a 19th century illustration by the artist Edward Joseph Sullivan. They were literally taking classical, older art, recoloring it, and completely redefining it to become the visual signature of a modern cultural revolution. How cool is that?
Which brings us to our final section, number 5, the FM radio revolution. So with all these rapid, sweeping changes in the music, the old top 40 AM radio format, the screaming DJs, the constant jingles, it just wasn't cutting it anymore. And out of a rather simple FCC ruling that prevented AM stations from fully simulcasting on FM, progressive FM radio was officially born. In July, WOR-FM in New York City adopted a totally free-form format. For the very first time, you had DJs playing uncharted, intelligent rock music, and they were finally offering a crucial platform for those controversial tracks we talked about earlier, like Society's Child.
But, as always, corporate media immediately recognized the commercial power of this youth movement, and they tried to package it up nicely. While the raw, experimental scene was thriving in underground clubs and on FM radio, NBC debuted The Monkees on television in September. Modeled directly on the Beatles films, it was this safe, sanitized, made-for-TV imitation of the counterculture. It was specifically targeting the younger fans who were maybe a bit alienated by the intense, complicated new sounds coming out on albums like Revolver.
The youth, however, couldn't be entirely sanitized or controlled, and the Sunset Strip riots in November violently proved that point. When Los Angeles enacted these strict loitering and curfew laws specifically targeting teenagers hanging out at the Pandora's Box nightclub, the youth pushed back. The city literally tried to demolish the club, which sparked massive protests, instantly inspiring a whole new wave of protest anthems, most famously Buffalo Springfield's iconic track For What It's Worth. The streets themselves had quite literally become a venue for activism.
So, to wrap up our explainer today, class, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. We've just analyzed the chart battles, the incredible studio innovations, the radio revolution, and the literal riots in the streets. So I want you to ask yourselves, as the monoculture shattered in 1966, did the establishment successfully package and co-opt the counterculture? Or did the counterculture permanently rewrite the rules of modern society? Think critically about that as we close out our study of 1966. See you all next time.